In modern society, there is something we depend on in almost every sphere of life. But it also poses an increasing threat to the health of the environment. And ultimately, it's our health that will suffer. It may be used for years or appear hopelessly outdated after only a few months. But when it comes to disposing of technology and its products, whether a 10-year-old fridge or a smartphone that you signed up for last year, the same question applies. What exactly should we do with electronic waste, or e-waste as it's known? Electronic and electrical goods are not completely plastic, not completely metal, not completely glass, not completely anything in fact. The result? Much of the e-waste that we generate isn't being recycled.
Residents who come to this dump have the choice of either dumping their stuff and allowing the staff here to separate it, or they themselves can separate their waste into plastics and cans and so on. In the hour that we've been here, this is all the e-waste that's arrived. You can see it's a rather motley collection, but this facility serves a huge area from Randburg, Fourways, Bryanston. So this is a surprisingly small amount of waste. But you can see it's very eclectic, from a heater to a broken down old fan, the ubiquitous cell phone charger, reminding you that e-waste is anything with an on and off switch.
Incredibly, almost 90% of the e-waste that we generate is not recycled. Discarded electronics now account for about 64,000 of the 108 million tons of waste that we produce every year. E-waste is said to be the fastest growing waste stream in South Africa. The E-Waste Association of South Africa, EWASA, a non-profit set up 5 years ago, is grappling with the challenge of e-waste management.
I think if we had absolute empirical data in terms of what the size of the problem is, I think everybody would have a significant wake-up call. Most of our ICT equipment is all imported, and if you speak to the Department of Customs and Excise, the number of tons that come in is astronomical, so it is huge.
So, what happens to the rest of our e-waste? Most of it gets mixed with other forms of waste and deposited in landfill sites or incinerated. The problem is, discarded electronic and electrical goods don't just add volume to these massive eyesores.
Any form of e-waste, in its inert form, is not a hazard. So if you've got an old laptop, a cell phone, a refrigerator, and it's in your home or your store or your garage, it's not a problem. As soon as those items get exposed to the elements, that's when the problem occurs, because all those items have got heavy metals, lead, mercury, silver, and so forth. And once they get exposed to the elements, those heavy metals leach into the soil and cause huge contamination. And unfortunately in South Africa, our legacy is that most of our landfill sites are right next door or very close to our river streams. That's one of the contributing factors to such high levels of toxicity in the river streams. And that's why you can't just throw those things away. They need to be put into a collection point that people have got confidence that the goods will then find themselves to an accredited recycler to be handled and treated correctly.
Does dealing with e-waste present particular challenges?
Absolutely. The problem lies around four main streams of e-waste. One is the old CRT monitor, the cathode ray tube, because of the vast amounts of lead contained into it. The second one is energy-saving lamps because of the mercury contained in them. The third one is refrigeration equipment because of the gases that's used to cool. And then lastly is printer cartridges because of the contaminants within the ink within those cartridges.
Apart from raising awareness about the potential dangers of e-waste, challenges seem to include creating appropriate drop-off points and collection procedures.
This is the e-waste drop-off facility here at the Ballyclare Garden Refuse site. And there's something that I noticed. Not only are they accepting e-waste, but the public's also encouraged to bring used motor oil to this facility. And if that oil gets mixed up with the e-waste, it makes a complex recycling effort even more difficult. Oh yeah, this is exactly what we were concerned about. Spilt oil. Well, let's have a look at what e-waste we can actually find here. I see there's some headphones over here, there's some loudspeakers, there's a phone on the floor, and what looks like an old child's electronic toy, and that's about it.
As recyclers will tell you, there's money to be made in e-waste. Certain materials used in the manufacture of electronic and electrical goods are valuable. 1 ton of personal computers is estimated to contain more gold than 17 tons of gold-bearing ore. But South Africa still lacks the capacity to tackle e-waste on several important fronts.
4 streams that I spoke earlier about, there's no facilities as such. So that's why we need the legislation to tweak those bits and pieces where investors will feel more willing to invest into the technology, knowing that there is some legislation that supports them. Because right now, if you have to invest 3 million rand in setting up a CRT recycling plant, you do so completely at your own risk, and the people will have to bring them there on a voluntary basis.
These tweaks, as Keith Anderson puts it, relate to the idea of extended producer responsibility, or EPR. This is something that you'll probably be hearing a lot about, that producers, also suppliers, should take total responsibility for their products, from cradle to grave. Government agrees that producers have a role to play.
We are avoiding, as government, to say that this is how you should deal with it, but we are allowing industry to tell us how they think they can be able to deal with the waste that they generate by themselves, and this will be through the development of industrial waste management plans.
In terms of the National Environmental Management Waste Act of 2008, the Minister can call on sectors of industry to develop plans for how they will manage waste that they generate. And if the Minister chooses not to do so, a sector can voluntarily draw up a plan. But there's a catch here. The clause in the Act that relates to these voluntary plans hasn't come into effect yet. As a result, the Voluntary Industry Waste Management Plan developed by IWASA and submitted to government in 2011 appears to be gathering a light layer of dust on government desks.
Simon, the reason we decided to delay the coming into effect of Section 28, subsection 7, was the fear that if we don't delay it without developing guidelines on how to develop these industry plans and regulations to specify for people, we were going to get a lot of different plans that we may not have capacity to be able to deal with.
I'll admit this is sounding all a little bit frustrating. Do we have a time frame for when Section 28 is going to be implemented?
Well, Simon, I think in the next year or so, we should have finalized this regulation.
Even if government does endorse the IWASA plan, it will remain voluntary. It seems the way ahead needs legislation for ensuring that producers and suppliers build the costs of recycling into their processes to help develop a market for e-waste. But the private sector and consumers can't be unduly burdened by this. Other countries also struggle to keep pace with e-waste, and some have chosen to export the problem rather than deal with it. Vast quantities of e-waste have been shipped to developing nations like China, India, and various states in West Africa. Here, the waste is processed cheaply with little regard for safety or the environment, often through burning casings and wires to recover metals. This is in defiance of efforts to prevent poor countries from becoming a dumping ground for toxic waste.
Absence of specific regulation is no reason why the private sector shouldn't take the lead as far as e-waste management is concerned. Nor is it any reason why members of the public shouldn't be grappling with issues around extended consumer responsibility. For most of us, producer responsibility aligns best with consumer responsibility at retailers like this one, through take-back schemes of your old electronic and electrical goods. It makes good common sense to bring your old phone back to the place that you bought it, or to the place where you're planning to get your new one from.
An example of this, Macro Stores, part of Massmart, began a take-back program for e-waste in 2009. So how has the balance been struck here between costs and extended producer responsibility?
There are some costs associated with the project. One is relates to space and finding space for the bins, and the other relates to the logistics of transporting the waste around. Macro provides a space at no cost, and we work with Desco, who have to date covered the cost of collection of the waste.
And not all of this is necessarily your stock that is coming back to you. Is that a problem?
No, it isn't. It's a common issue. In terms of consumer protection, consumers can bring back waste to stores that can't go into a common waste collection system, and we need to take responsibility for, or assist them in disposing of that waste.
Of course, you guys aren't general waste managers by trade, and I would have thought one of the problems is that unmonitored bins could become receptacles for general waste. How do you deal with that?
Generally speaking, our consumers understand what it's for and they utilise it accordingly. One of the things we have done to ensure that people don't put inappropriate waste in the bins is we've actually clearly indicated what sort of waste is appropriate for the bin. Over here we have the e-waste disposal window, which controls what people can put inside. As you can see, what's very important about these windows is they stop people being able to take waste out, so make sure that any waste you dispose of is secure. If you do have an item that doesn't fit through the window, like a washing machine, there's a padlock on the side of the container. You can open the container and you can dispose of it there.
Aside from preventing environmental destruction, there's another important reason for improving management of e-waste in South Africa, and that's the potential for job creation in this sector. Remade Recycling, a formal recycler with operations in Gauteng and the Northwest Province, recently extended its operations to accommodate e-waste.
We realize that in the interests of our customer, we have to extend our business offering to ensure a total waste minimization plan is in place. Customers have a drive to reduce cost and an awareness drive due to the environmental responsibilities that they as corporates and as companies are adhering to.
Once all this material has been through your process, where does it go?
They're different markets. At the end of the day, you're going to get a certain market that would like to have your boards, etc. But at the same time, if you think about a computer, it has housing and it has tin and steel also incorporated in it. That will go to a completely different sector.
We should keep in mind that informal recyclers have also carved out a niche for themselves in the industry, and we must take care to ensure that they're included in efforts to manage e-waste more sustainably.
Unfortunately, those communities are being taken advantage of because people are offering them ridiculous rates for the waste that they've collected. If you brought them into a formalized process and register each one of those communities as an SMME, you can then link them to a refurbisher or to a recycler with a proper agreement in place, with proper pricing in place, so they aren't taken advantage of. So the whole idea is we're hoping to launch 400 national e-waste collection points throughout the country before the end of the year. And the whole idea is we'll go to each one of those, get them to register, assist them, provide some skills transfer, and link them with commercial enterprises who will pay them a living wage.
There's much to be done if enjoyment of these sophisticated devices isn't going to come at substantial cost to the environment. If we're going to continue to build our lives around convergence, these challenges need to be met, and met in a hurry, because technology isn't going to slow down anytime soon.